Hello and welcome to a brand new edition of a World Panorama with me, Aishwarya Kapoor. In the next 30 minutes, we'll get you a complete roundup of the biggest international news stories that are changing our world. First up, let's take a look at the top headlines. Russia and China launched the biggest military exercise in Russia since 1981. Vostok 2018 involves nearly 3 lakh troops and close to 40,000 planes, helicopters, drones, tanks and other vehicles. Exercises are to go on till 17th of September. First joint military exercise among member nations of Bimstec to conclude on a Sunday near Pune. Exercise focused on boosting interoperability among member nations' forces. Deadly wave of violence in Afghanistan after recent diplomatic efforts to end the war with Taliban. At least 70 killed as suicide bomber targets a protest rally in Nangarhar. Concerns on security ahead of parliamentary elections. Five killed, hundreds rescued as a tropical storm Florence barrels into eastern Carolina coast in the U.S. and moves inland. Trees knocked down and rivers overflow, leading to flooding on streets. Here's a stronger storm, a super typhoon Mangkhut makes landfall in Philippines, leaving millions at risk. And Brazil poised for unpredictable presidential race. A front-runner and jail leader Lula da Silva abandons run. Country's electoral court had barred two-time former President Lula's candidacy on corruption charges. Our top story this week is Vostok 2018, Russia's ongoing largest war games in nearly 4 decades. Russia launched a massive military exercise with hundreds of thousands of troops, including Chinese soldiers, taking part for the first time in eastern Siberia. The massive military maneuvers come as the tensions between the West and Russia have intensified and an escalating US-China trade war. The drills have been condemned by NATO as a rehearsal for large-scale conflict. The start of Vostok 2018 coincided with a meeting between Russia's President Vladimir Putin and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping on the sidelines of a summit there. War games on an epic scale. Russia began on Tuesday what it calls the largest war games in the post-Soviet era. The military exercises that are taking place in Siberia will go on till 17th of September and involve more than 3 lakh soldiers, 36,000 tanks and military vehicles, 1,000 aircrafts and 18 naval vessels. Russia has described the drills as even bigger than the country's largest Cold War-era exercise in 1981 that put NATO allies on edge. Russia's largest ever war games also joined by China, a powerful show of burgeoning military ties between Moscow and Beijing amid their tensions with the US. China has sent about 3,200 troops, 900 combat vehicles and 30 aircrafts to join the drills at the Siberian firing range. China and Russia have staged joint drills before, but not on such a large scale. Mongolia also has sent a military contingent. As the maneuvers kicked off, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Russia on Tuesday to attend Eastern Economic Forum in the Russian city of Vladivostok. President Vladimir Putin treated Xi to pancakes with caviar in a show of their warm rapport. Putin held talks with his Chinese counterpart on the sidelines of the event. The two leaders, after their meet, called for promoting sub-national cooperation to cement the bilateral relations. Xi and Putin acknowledged that China-Russia ties have been developing with stronger momentum this year and have entered a new period of faster development on a higher level.
Mutual trust between China and Russia has grown increasingly strong, and bilateral cooperation in various fields such as politics, economy, and security has been fruitful.
Chinese President Xi urged both sides to consolidate their traditional friendship and promote the Russia-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership of coordination to a new height.
Thanks to joint efforts of both sides, the political advantages of China-Russia relations have been translated into tangible cooperation fruits continuously.
双方相互坚定支持对方走符合本国国情的发展道路。
Moscow and Beijing have forged what they describe as a strategic partnership, expressing their shared opposition to the unipolar world, the term they use to describe perceived US global domination. The war games have laid a foundation for China and Russia to enhance cooperation on international arena. From China's perspective, the emerging military alliance with Russia sends a strong signal to the US and its ally Japan as Beijing moves to defend its interests in the South China Sea. For Russia, the increasingly robust alliance with China is particularly important amid the growing tensions with the US and its allies and a looming threat of more biting US sanctions. Russia can also see the huge potential dividends of Sino-Russian cooperation. China is currently Russia's largest trading partner, and it is also the largest source of foreign investment in the Far East, with investments of around $4 billion. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. All right, let's put the story into perspective. We have with us Mr. Suresh Ke Goel, former ambassador, joining us in the studio. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on the Rajya Sabha television. Sir, we'd like to understand from you now, Vostok military exercises are, what Russia is saying, are the biggest since the Cold War. So how do you look at these exercises? Do you think there is a pattern that we are seeing here? You know, a more assertive Russia, significantly increasing its defense spending, and more of military assertiveness we are seeing?
Absolutely. I think what you said in the last sentence really sums it up. What we are seeing really is a greater assertiveness militarily, strategically, politically, diplomatically from the Russian Federation. And the exercises Vostok that happen now. In fact, Russia has, ever since Putin became the president of the country, we have been seeing a pattern there that Russia is asserting itself globally, yes, as not in the same Cold War context, but basically trying to get back to the same kind of superpower status, which it's lost economically and militarily in 1990. Now, over the last 1 decade, Russia has been trying to repair the economy, successfully sometimes, unsuccessfully sometimes, but it's a patchy affair. But the dependency of Russia on China has increased considerably during the period. Now, China coming through as a joint partner in the military exercises, Vostok 18, suggests a greater assertiveness and a reconfiguration of, I would say, strategic forces globally, which perhaps, not perhaps, but which are actually challenging the existing USA and the Western world order. Yes.
So, as you just mentioned about China, of course, China is taking part in these exercises. Of course, China has, you know, taken part in joint exercises with Russia in the past, but not to this particular extent that we are seeing here. You know, and we also saw Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping meeting a third time this year. And of course, we expect this bonhomie to continue as well. So what does this bonhomie mean for Asia and in world in general?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, at an economic level, for Russia to really be able to manage its economy and to have access to the resources, as well as to sell its oil and gas that is after the Crimean affair, it has to basically get its gas out somewhere, and China needs those resources, energy resources. Therefore, we have seen over the last practically 1 decade, greater collaboration economically between China and Russia, as it happens. And there is a greater dependence of Russia on China for its own economic progress and the economic growth. Over the last several years, particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, we are seeing a greater pushback from China to the USA in the Pacific as well as in the Indian Ocean. And I would say that even the project BRI, which it talks about as a connectivity project, to my mind, it's a very strategic kind of a project which essentially challenges the US's supremacy not just in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, but also to the north, towards the Atlantic. Now, in that pushback, China has its own aspirations to be the next power to challenge USA. Russia wants to regain its old glory, its old status, and therefore the military exercises to demonstrate that it is still a very, very significant military power. When China joins Russia in this biggest ever exercise, according to some reports, China and Russia together actually they go beyond the military power of the USA. So clearly, it's a lot of message, sending a message to the USA that you cannot really remain there for forever. So what, as I said earlier, that we are seeing a reconfiguration of the strategic space here. And China and USA are now coming together. I don't think alignment is a word to use here, but there is a greater coincidence of interest, strategic interest between China and Russia in the current context, particularly after what Trump has been doing, both not so much to Russia, but to China in terms of both the tariff war, in terms of challenging China, starting with the Indo-Pacific, you know, those kind of concepts. So I think China and Russia have taken note of it, and they are realigning themselves to question that really.
And Ambassador Goel, what about India? Should India be alarmed at these exercises? You know, considering the fact we've been looking at China and Russia policy separately. As you mentioned, there's a sort of this axis sort of developing. Should we be alarmed and should we tweak our foreign policy accordingly?
Those are very strong words. I don't think that we need to really look at the whole thing with alarm or tweaking, etc., etc. Yes, anything of this kind must be noted, and if we need to make adjustments in our responses in our foreign policy, we need to see what kind of adjustments do we need to make. After all, in today's global world, globalization is something which cannot exist without our being proactive on the global affairs. It's not really just lying back and observe. We are not an observer anymore. We have our very, very critical national interests, lines of communication. We need to protect our trade. We need to protect our political and the strategic influence across the Indian Ocean to be able to see that we have access to the resources and that we are able to basically push our own agenda globally. So we need all these things, and when two countries, militarily powerful countries like Russia and China come together like this. Mind you, one thing that you must notice that joint exercises this time, I am not a military expert and therefore I cannot say whether militarily they can work together or not. There's a lot of issue of interoperability. But it is sending a message that we can come together and we must take note of it. India as country, we have to take note of it and see how we make adjustments if necessary.
Absolutely. So the inevitability of these exercises by Russia and of course by the NATO members as well are understandable given the state of hostile relations between the two sides. But these exercises also aggravate the already tense political relationships. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us and giving your views and sharing your perspective on the entire story. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much, Aishwarya. Thanks.
And moving on to another top international story. In a first such initiative, militaries of Bimstec member nations, barring Nepal, are conducting anti-terror exercises at Ond near Pune. The joint exercise started from 10th of September and it will go on till the 16th at Pune's Ond military station. The idea behind the exercise is to enhance cooperation in dealing with the challenge of terrorism in the region. The exercise is focused on boosting interoperability among the forces and exchanging best practices to contain terror-related activities. The exercise is mainly focusing on handling and neutralization of IEDs and training in search and cordon operations. The exercise is taking place nearly 2 weeks after the leaders of the Bimstec countries in their summit talks in Kathmandu resolved to join hands to combat the scourge of terrorism effectively. The Nepal government has decided against participating in the military drill. The Bimstec is a regional grouping comprising Bangladesh, India, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Bhutan and Nepal.
The aim of this joint training exercise is to acquaint all the armies of the Bimstec nations with each other operational procedures, thus ensuring better compatibility and interoperability in counter-terrorist operations.
Now news from Afghanistan, where in the latest wave of spiraling violence in the country, a suicide bomber targeted a protest rally in eastern Afghanistan on Tuesday, killing close to 70 civilians. The Taliban advances and the surge in attacks have raised skepticism about the government's ability to hold long-delayed parliamentary elections that are scheduled for next month, followed by a presidential vote in the month of April. The violence follows the recent diplomatic efforts to end the lengthy war with the Taliban. Just last week, U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis made an unexpected trip to Afghanistan as the U.S. tries to make headway in the country after 17 years of war. It was one of the deadliest insurgent attacks in recent months in Afghanistan. 68 people killed in a suicide bombing in East Afghanistan on Tuesday. The bomber struck in a crowd of people protesting against a local police chief in Nangarhar province near Pakistan. Another 165 people were injured. Local hospitals struggle to cope with the casualties.
There was a huge blast and it killed and wounded many people. I have taken one of my friends to this hospital for treatment, but I don't know about the exact number of people who were killed and wounded.
No group has said it carried out the suicide bombing, but Islamic State militants are active in the province. Earlier, 5 people were injured in 2 bomb attacks near a school in the same province. Hundreds have died in a wave of recent attacks. Elections are due in October. Officials are warning that more attacks are likely, with campaign rallies due to be held ahead of parliamentary elections. The violence has led some to question whether the poll can be held on 20th of October as scheduled. However, country's chief executive Abdullah, while in India's financial capital Mumbai, said that Afghan people were with the government and were against the Talibanization of the nation.
The main thing is the Afghan people support their national defense and security forces, which is important, the support from the people, and we should improve the cooperation between those forces and the people and vice versa. That's important and that's critical.
Government forces have suffered several setbacks in recent weeks in their battles against the Taliban. In August, militants also briefly seized the major city of Ghazni, sitting on the main highway between the capital Kabul and the south of the country. The renewed fighting has dampened the prospect of diplomatic progress ending the war. Earlier this year, hopes were raised after an unprecedented 3-day ceasefire during Eid celebrations was largely respected by both sides. However, the Ghazni ceasefire announcement was limited to the Taliban and excluded other militant groups such as the Islamic State.
The people of Afghanistan are against Talibanization of the country, but at the same time, the people understand that if Taliban give up violence in links with the terrorist groups into a political process, that's in the best interest of the country.
The recent attacks have intensified questions about the ability of the government and the efficiency of US-led troops in Afghanistan. Interestingly, this comes even as US marked the 17th anniversary of the 11th of September 2001 attacks on Tuesday. US troops have been stationed in Afghanistan in response to the 11th of September attacks, which were carried out by Al-Qaeda, the terrorist network then based in the country. The recent attacks deepen concern about already poor security, as the resurgent Taliban makes inroads in some areas of North Afghanistan. The group had no influence in those areas even when it was in power from 1996 to 2001, when it was ousted by Afghan resistance forces and US airstrikes. It is not surprising then that Afghans routinely ask why the United States, 17 years after it intervened in their country, has not managed to secure their country. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. In World Panorama, we'll take a very short break. More news that made headlines in the world this week coming up on the other side. Stay tuned. Welcome back after the break, and now news from the United States, where at least 5 people have died as a tropical storm Florence mauls the U.S. East Coast. After coming ashore in North Carolina as a Category 1 hurricane, Florence was downgraded to a tropical storm on Friday afternoon, and it trudged into South Carolina as night came. Evacuation warnings are in place for 1.7 million people. Florence is packing sustained winds of 110 kilometers per hour and has knocked out power to 6 lakh homes and causing buildings to crumble. Parts of North Carolina have seen storm surges as high as 10 feet.
I've never been so terrified in my entire life. It was horrifying. Just wondering what's going on and where the water's going to go and how high it's going to go and how we are going to get out. And if we were going to get trapped in the attic or not.
We are expecting several more days of rain, and our focus now is getting people away from immediate danger. And then we will shift into putting our communities back together. The storm is wreaking havoc on our state, and we're deeply concerned for farms, for businesses, for schools, and even whole communities, which could be wiped away.
Meanwhile, a fierce typhoon bringing winds of over 200 km per hour made landfall in the northern Philippines on Saturday. Super Typhoon Mangkhut, a Category 5 storm, brought powerful gusts, heavy rainfall and caused power outages in some areas. Tens of thousands of people have been evacuated from coastal areas where warnings were issued about possible storm surges of 3 to 6 meters. Floods, landslides and widespread property destruction is expected. There were no immediate reports of damage or injuries. Mangkhut's peak winds are stronger than those of Hurricane Florence. News from Brazil now, which is witnessing the most unpredictable presidential race since the return to democracy 3 decades ago. The front-runner, former President Lula da Silva, abandoned presidential run on Tuesday. This comes after the country's top electoral tribunal barred the convicted former head of state from running. A letter from the imprisoned Lula said that he would step aside to allow his running mate Fernando Haddad to stand for the presidency. While support for Haddad, a 55-year-old former mayor of Sao Paulo, is rising, but he does not have the national name recognition of Lula and still lags his rivals.
Two of Brazil's presidential contenders rallying supporters in Rio de Janeiro in hopes of garnering votes ahead of October's election. Ciro Gomes of Democratic Workers' Party interacted with students at Brazil Science Academy. Geraldo Alckmin of the Socialist Democratic Party of Brazil choosing to walk among shoppers and vendors, promising to turn the city around.
Agora ele não conhece o Brasil.
Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad does not have experience, nor does he have the will to serve during these very difficult times. We are on the eve of a pro-fascist phenomena, and that phenomena is a real threat for Brazil.
E esse fenômeno proto-fascista é uma ameaça real ao Brasil.
O centro da paz.
I am from Sao Paulo, but I love Rio de Janeiro. We are going to work together to recover Rio de Janeiro.
Meanwhile, another leading contender in presidential race, Jair Bolsonaro, is recovering from an emergency surgery. He was stabbed last week by an assailant during a street rally. Several candidates have a good chance of making it to the runoff vote. Majority of voters are being disdainful of the political class after 4 years of unprecedented corruption investigation across parties.
At this moment, the election is on track for Bolsonaro to reach the second round and probably face Ciro Gomes or Fernando Haddad. That's according to a poll.
Earlier this week, the country's most popular politician jailed former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva of Workers' Party abandoned his run for presidency. Lula, as he is widely known in Brazil, made the decision to step aside after Brazil's Supreme Court barred him from running because of his conviction on corruption and money laundering charges. The 72-year-old has denied any wrongdoing. He has been in jail since April, serving a 12-year sentence. Lula was looking good to revive his political fortunes, running for top office this year, but had to end his legal battle. He served 2 terms as country's president from 2003 to 2011.
The Supreme Court has already decided on this matter. The judges saw nothing wrong with the use of Clean Record Act in a case like Lula's, so this is something very unlikely to change.
The man Lula picked to take his place is former Sao Paulo Mayor Fernando Haddad, who has now also hit the campaign trail. In a letter, Lula urged his supporters to now back his running mate. Haddad will need all political power that Lula's backing can offer to make it into a likely runoff vote, which would take place between the 2 top finishers in October's 7 first-round ballot if no one wins a majority.
Our project is a collective project that has Lula as the main leader, the main inspiration. He validated every point of the program with me, so you have an idea of what the Workers' Party government will do.
This week witnessed the fall from grace for the man who was once Brazil's most popular politician, Lula. The man who came to power promising change, a man once described by Barack Obama as the most popular politician on earth, yet ended up leaving politics with a very different legacy. Lula is out of politics now, but will continue to be a formidable influence in Brazilian politics for a while to come. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And here is a wrap of some more important international developments in Globe Watch. About 1 million people on Tuesday took to the streets of Barcelona to mark Catalonia's National Day and show continued support for independence. The annual celebration was the first since Catalonia's failed attempt to break away from Spain last October. The European Parliament this week voted to punish Hungary for cracking down on democratic institutions. With the vote, the EU set off a process that could ultimately lead to the suspension of the country's voting rights in the European Union. It is the first time that the Parliament has launched the EU disciplinary process against a member state. Wednesday's vote in France followed a report of the European Parliament that raised concerns about Hungary's erosion of democracy in recent years. And Myanmar's Aung San Suu Kyi has defended the jailing of 2 Reuters journalists despite international condemnation. Suu Kyi broke her silence on the issue on Thursday while attending an international economics conference in Vietnam. She said that the 2 journalists, Wa Lon and Kyo Seo Oo, had broken the law and their conviction had nothing to do with the freedom of expression at all. The 2 were sentenced for possession of police documents while investigating the killing of Rohingya Muslims. And that's all in this edition of our World Panorama. We'd leave you with the visuals of the US marking the 17th anniversary of the 11th of September attacks on Tuesday. Speaking to the families of the victims in Pennsylvania, where the hijacked Flight 93 crashed into an open field, US President Donald Trump praised the men and women of United Flight 93 for saving countless lives when they struggled with the hijackers. He also called the field where the plane went down a monument to American defiance. Vice President Pence led the memorial service at the Pentagon. Nearly 3,000 people were killed when hijacked jetliners crashed into World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and a field in Pennsylvania on 11th of September 2001. So take a look at these visuals. I'll see you next week with another interesting episode of World Panorama. Bye-bye.